start. So,
thank you to all three. Chairman, back to you.
Thank you. Chris Loder.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, gentlemen. I would just like to ask some fairly straightforward questions, Stephen, to you, if I may, to begin with. Conscious of the situation that you've been in with Buckinghamshire Council in not being successful, could you just briefly outline your sort of reaction to the department's decision? And I'm particularly keen as to whether or not you think it's been a fair decision that you have not been, or your council has not been awarded any funding.
Well, I should say we have requested feedback from the DfT, so we haven't got that yet. But we fully participated in the process to make sure our bid and the ambitions matched what we believe the objectives of this strategy were in the DfT. So I'm absolutely convinced that the bid will have hit some good scoring markers. So I'm not quite sure where the tipping point came in terms of being able to answer how fair that was. The disappointment we feel is genuine, and I think I said in my earlier comments, this strategy gained some traction. Both publicly, people were aware something was happening on buses. We very much wanted to engage with that, and therefore the people are asking what's happening now, and so it's disappointing not to have money.
Do you believe that your council and the residents of Buckinghamshire have almost been sort of set up for a fall in that respect? Because clearly, from what you've outlined, an expectation has been set, and that has now not happened.
I wouldn't say we've been set up for a fall. I clearly understand it's a competitive process, which is maybe something that needs to be considered anyway. So I wouldn't go as far as say set up for a fall, but clearly the expectation has been raised. We have worked diligently to provide something very comprehensive, and so I would say we've been let down by the fact even an extension of the things we've already done that we know is a stated objective, like e-ticketing, that even certain bits don't get any funding in something we know is a key part of the national strategy.
Gloucestershire, Suffolk, Dorset, Cumbria, Lincolnshire, Leicestershire are 6 of many rural areas, as well as Buckinghamshire, that have not received any BSIP funding. Would you say, in your opinion, that urban areas have benefited much more than rural areas in the government's decision?
Yes.
Okay. And therefore, would you say that for your residents, indeed, such as the residents of Dorset, where I represent, would you therefore say that rural areas have been left behind in this work stream, therefore, not having buses where maybe they were required?
Yeah, so when I mentioned two-tier system earlier, it's primarily an urban-rural split, so I would say yes, they are certainly at risk of being left behind.
Do you think that the department should be doing more, and any thoughts on what, to help with predominantly rural areas to deal with this issue? Because rural isolation, as I'm sure you will well know, is an increasing difficulty.
Well, I think what I would say for that is with buses in particular, buses are the next obvious move to overcome the car dependency, as I mentioned earlier, and probably, I would argue, would be the most cost-effective. So I think that's very much why we set things on the frequency of service. And that will require some long-term funding to make the shift that Peter talked about in terms of having that certainty that future services will exist. And I think they would therefore need to work with strategic transport bodies and authorities to say, what is the network of use here now, and how can we expand that, and accept that the cost per head of population will be greater than it will be in an urban centre.
I'm sorry, I don't know which subnational transport body covers Buckinghamshire, but do you think they offer any value whatsoever in this process for the bus service improvement?
I think they absolutely do, for the parts I was mentioning earlier about the cross-border piece, and I do think that needs to be looked at on that more regional basis. So yes, they do, and I think they can help. We have bus companies who have some locuses of depots in the county and some out, and as I said, there's a difference on fleet, so they do have a role to play.
Given the situation that you're now in Buckinghamshire, what sort of decisions are you having to make, or what next steps do you think that the authority is going to have to consider for funding of buses?
So our funding will be fairly flatlined on the routes that we currently have, but and in terms of what we do on the BSIP, we are looking to actively see how we can extend the multi-ticketing, try and improve on a passenger charter, because big conversations on the level of expected service, training of staff and so on with the operators. So we will continue to work with the market, but we will not get the expansion and not create the step change in use that I wanted.
Are there any specific initiatives that you think the Department for Transport should undertake in order to help you in that situation?
Yes, greening of fleet and massively funding the connectivity of tickets between operators and, I would argue, modes of transport.
Yeah. And do you think the concessionary bus pass should be reviewed as well, or not?
Well, in fact, interestingly, it's our concessionaires who are only back at about 65% of pre-COVID levels, rather than all passengers at about 80%. And we do have a relatively older demographic, and that shows you there's not the confidence in returning to the buses yet, even for people who have used them previously. So I also think the government, in the same way they've done for railways, could do a big campaign on returning to bus use. In terms of it being reviewed, I think if we're going to expand bus use, then the way that the concessionary fares work needs to be more attractive and clearly laid out to members of the public.
Do you think the concessionary fares model as it currently stands disincentivises operators, i.e. it constrains the extent to which they will operate? Yes,
I mean, I think if it could be, as I said, more attractive, then they're likely to push it.
Thank you very much. This is my sort of quick fire round, really, to all three next. I'm really keen to understand, just very, very succinctly, were the expectations of the department clear to you in terms of the formation of the BSIP bid and your submission? Shall we start with you, Peter?
I suppose it was iterative. So were they clear? They were clear through an iterative process that became
but
clear.
By that, do you mean you had to ask clarifications about certain points in
Yes.
order to be crystal clear? And do you think, from your understanding, do you think all councils who submitted would have come to the same recognition that clarifications would have had to have been asked, or maybe not? You may not be able to answer it, I understand if you can't.
Well, the only thing I can tell you from that is because, so regionally, I set up a forum with our adjacent authorities, who generally are all shire county authorities, so that we could have a bit of a learning exchange with each other, and we knew that we had more information from government than they did. So that way it became, and we similarly did the same with other metropolitan areas. And actually we were all discussing what approaches are you taking? Are we viewing it the right way? We're interpreting this as this. Are you interpreting the same, etc.? So that we were undertaking our own sort of clarification approaches around.
So broadly speaking, you were saying it was clear after some sort of dialogue that the specific objectives required by DFT. I think that's what you're saying. Right. Stephen, could I ask you the same question, please?
I'd echo what Peter said. Iterative process. We asked questions in, came back, but in the end, though, at least the responses that came back were useful in providing further clarifications, or at least our understanding was based on what we put in the bid.
So would you therefore agree that the original specification that was sent was actually not adequately clear enough, without clarifications, to make sure you were absolutely to the point?
I would say yes.
Yeah, thank you. Tony, can I ask you the same question?
Yes, I think there was obviously guidance from the department. I agree entirely with the points that were made. All highway authorities already have, of course, their local transport plans, which will include a whole raft of aspirations, some more detailed, some more worked out. And so we were able to take forward that work in discussion with the department. I suppose the question I, as an elected member, and others probably were asking, was throughout this process, what is it that they are going to be marking against? And there isn't that level of transparency, there still isn't.
That's not there, you're saying?
No.
No. Okay.
I mean, if you can't really compare it with the tender process, but when you bid against a tender, there's normally some indication as to how much percentage will be allocated to value, and all the other elements. But that wasn't spelt out, and there still isn't in terms of the way in which the department has allocated and approved bids. There is a certain lack of transparency, I would suggest. Now, somebody who's received 26 million, I don't want the department sitting there saying, oh, we're ungrateful. And we're not ungrateful, but it would help for other authorities and for future bidding to have that clarity.
I'm going to stop you there because I've got to keep going. Can I just be very clear with all three of you? Have you respectively received feedback on your bid, successful or not? Peter?
Yes.
You've received feedback?
Yes.
Tony, you've received feedback?
Yes, but as was said, it's an iterative process. It's not just one feedback.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Stephen, you haven't, I think you said.
Correct, we have not.
So, from talking to other authorities, including Dorset, before coming to this meeting, it feels to me that those who have not been successful have not been fed back to, and those who have been successful have received feedback. Is that a consensus that you would agree with from your understanding so far? Yes or no?
I would expect that, yeah, but I think this plays to the capacity point of the
really
department.
Time, so it's just yes or no.
I don't think the department's got the resources to be able to do.
I'm coming on to that. So
okay.
it's a yes or no answer. So you broadly agree with that statement,
Yeah.
wouldn't you? Yeah. Stephen? Yeah?
Yes.
Great. And just finally, before I hand back, Chairman, the bids were submitted in October. It's taken 6 months to give, as far as I understand it, preliminary awards. The capability of the Department for Transport to administer this process, would you say is that they have strong capability or very weak based on your experiences? Peter, can I ask you first?
Certainly, I don't know if I could call it weak. I think what I could say to you is that I'm appreciative of the fact that there are various different elements that are trying to be addressed at the same time. I think there is definitely room for improvement in the approach that's been taken.
Thank you. Stephen, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, the DFT set their own deadlines. They know what to expect. And it feels like it wasn't resourced to meet the expectation. You would think that's pretty much 101.
Tony, how about you?
I agree with that.
Wonderful. Stephen, you said you haven't received feedback. Has the department told you when you're likely to receive it?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No, okay. I had a call with the Minister last week about Dorset. The Minister, I think, thought we were given feedback, or we were able to ask for it. We had asked for it. We won't be getting it for at least the end of the month. So just to give you a little bit of insight into that respect. And finally, in terms of feedback for the department, you've all, I think, broadly agreed that the department needs to get better in administering this process. Are there any specific things that you would like to see improve that would have enabled you to do better in this process? Peter, can I just ask you brief answers if you don't mind?
In terms of specifics for this process, I think I would just probably have to say about timeliness, clarity and clear approach. I do think that there are wider questions because of the elements that are around COVID support and how that's aligned at the same time.
Yeah, thanks. Stephen?
First of all, I wouldn't want the process to get in the way of the DFT or others trying to do something like this at pace. I think that's really important to say. We obviously worked at pace. I do think, given the nature of the awards that seem to be there in the preliminary funding, they may want to consider tranches of bids or bids of quantum. So clearly 160 whatever million compared, is 3 times the size of ours. And that might have helped give some indication of resource allocation to achieve certain aims.
Of your total bid, the percentage of capital expenditure and operating expenditure, Might be a bit of a curveball question, that one. If you can't answer it, understand it.
Yeah,
If
I'll
you would
send
let
it
us
in.
know, that
Yep.
would be appreciated. I don't
I'll
know
do
if either Tony or Peter knows the answer to that question in terms of your bids. If not, would you all be happy just...
The difference between capital and revenue?
So, of your total bid that you submitted...
Yeah, 100
what,
million. Yeah.
What percentage of that was capital and what percentage of it was sort of
About
operating?
75% was capital.
75% capital expenditure and then 25% OPEX, basically.
We're about 2/3 to 1/3.
Okay.
I'm confident to say the majority was capital, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you could just sort of confirm that for us,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I
will
think
do.
there's something for us to understand in a bit more detail, because of course there are a lot of authorities that actually would benefit from more operating expenditure than capital expenditure. And if the criteria has not been clear to you, which I think you've all concurred that it has not been crystal clear, we need to probably drill into that in a bit more detail.
I would just make the point that and this plays to a wider...
Really briefly, Tony, because I need to...
The department is seeking to micromanage too much, and that's the capacity problem they have. If there were proper devolution to local authorities, particularly those of us who have shown we can deliver, then they could save themselves time and money, but they won't let go. And that applies to wider government and obviously a wider
Tony, we've
debate.
got that message. Chairman, back to you.
Chris, thanks a lot. Just to finish the process on BSIPs before we move to the enhanced